Okay, so the topic that I chose for today is not a typical kind of topic. It's not really one that's geared towards personal growth. It's not really that relevant to most Jews, in their daily lives. But I figured that it's important for Jews today to know and understand why Jews historically have not accepted Jesus, and we can even say that the Jews have rejected him. It's very important to know. I think everyone probably has had a conversation. Probably everyone in the room has at least once had a conversation with someone who wanted to either understand why Jews don't believe in Jesus or try to convince you why you should believe in Jesus. Everyone's nodding. So I think it is relevant, in that sphere, because I think it's very important to know why the Jews not believe in Jesus. Now, I don't want anyone to think that I'm here to disparage, to make fun of, to denigrate other religions.
But you can.
I can and I might, but it's not the point. Thanks, Max. That's not the point. It's just it's very important to have clarity, to clarify what are the basic, Jewish reasons for rejection of Jesus. And it'll be enough, I think, in 1 hour or a half hour, whatever we have, it's enough time to encapsulate the different ideas of why we reject Jesus, and therefore, if you ever encounter someone who wants to know why the Jews reject Jesus, or wants to convince you why you, as a Jew, should adopt Jesus as your Lord and Savior, you say to them, no, I remember the rabbi once said that this and this and this and this and this and this are the reasons why we don't believe in Jesus, and I'm a Jew and I don't believe in Jesus. Okay? The word Christ. What does the word Christ mean?
Messiah, redemption. King.
Messiah. So there's a big misconception because some people think, man on the street thinks, the average Jew thinks that maybe Christ means God. Christ comes from the Greek word Christos, which means anointed one. Which is the Hebrew word for anointed one is Mashiach or Mashuach. Why would we call Messiah, the king, someone who's anointed? Because in ancient times, or at least in the Jewish world, when you inaugurated a king, they would take oil and pour it over the person's head, as evidenced many times in Tanakh, in the Jewish Bible, in the Old Testament. And they would take oil, pour it in the head. Samuel comes to David, pours the oil on your head, you're king. And the idea of the Mashiach, of the Messiah, it will be a Jewish king who's going to redeem the Jewish people, bring them back to Israel, collect all the Jews from all different corners of the world, reinstitute the Sanhedrin, rebuild the temple, and that will be the king, like the Messiah, the anointed one. Not just a king, but the king. The one who, after years of exile, of expulsion, of persecution, is going to bring the Jews back to the land of Israel. So that's just a little basis on the word Christ. And this brings us, I think, to the very first point of why rationally Jews have rejected Jesus. Because what exactly are we rejecting? Are we rejecting a Messiah or are we rejecting a God? What are we rejecting? And this point is I think the most important point in the entire religion of Christianity is the status of Jesus, and no one could tell you clearly what exactly do they mean by believe in Jesus. Is he the Messiah as described in the Old Testament? In every single one of the books of the Nevi'im, of the prophets, it talks about the Messiah, it describes the Messiah. They use that as proofs for Jesus fulfilling the criteria of the Messiah. On the other hand, they claim that he's a God. So we have to clarify exactly, which is the first point. It's not so clear, what are we rejecting? Are we rejecting Jesus, the Messiah, or are we rejecting Jesus, the God or the demigod?
Both.
Well, we are doing both. But the first point is that this idea, this point of the status of Jesus is the most important point, or the most important idea in the entire religion of Christianity. And as late as the year 325, We're talking about almost 300 years after Jesus is dead, right? They convene the council of Nicaea. They convene the council of Nicaea to vote on this issue. They had a vote. They had a vote to determine what is Jesus. Is he the Jewish Messiah is described in the Torah, in the Tanakh, in the Jewish Bible, or is he God? And they voted 218-2 to declare Jesus as being a godly, a divine, a deity, some sort of godly whatever. Just think about how. I think how can we say silly or how irrational it is that 300 years after the founding of the religion, or at least the life of the founder or the most important person of the religion, they made a decision that he's a god. It's just, I think it's very hard to accept that in a rational manner.
Did they say that not separate from what we know of God, right? Not like a separate, like the Hindu people that has multiple.
What are you saying? Oh, you want to know what?
No. When you say they pointed him as God, right? Or as an extension of God.
Yes.
That's God.
You want to know how do they do that? How do they rationalize it? How do they justify that? I don't know. That's a good question because how many gods do they believe in? Huh? He wanted to know Max wanted to know here, how do the Christians, how do they understand the idea of one God versus three gods, right? But interestingly, by the way, the whole three themes, the whole Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, that came years later, 381, right?
Well,
I guess 56 years later, or was that? Yeah, it'd be 56 years later they came up with that idea. So
There still is no clear consensus.
Exactly.
As to what they
Exactly.
Just there's no clear consensus among Jews.
But the definition of God.
There are plenty of Jews that don't even believe in God.
Okay, but we don't. I'm saying the Jewish definition of God, classical Jewish philosophical definition of God.
Normative.
Huh? Normative Judaism is accepted. You don't have different schisms and major schisms in Jewish ideology. You have different levels of practice, of course. But the definition of God is accepted across all. If you don't believe in God, fine, but at least you have the definition in God, right? The definition of God, and that hasn't changed. And it's not like 300 years after Mount Sinai, we have a council convened to discuss what happened there. Like that doesn't that whole Monday morning quarterbacking of making a vote 300 years after the religion started.
I thought there have been plenty of sects that have challenged those classical views. Those sects have just not survived.
Well, you could consider Christianity maybe as it started off as being a subsect of the Jews, the Essenes, the Karaites. We have
Pharisees.
Well, no, not the Pharisees. The Pharisees were the Pharisees was an invented name for the Jews.
The Pharisees?
The Pharisees, yeah, I'm saying.
Sadducees.
The Sadducees, yeah. Tzedokим.
Well, the one thing I don't get is the ones that you say, I saw this website once, I was just curious, it said, there's one God, but then it said, then there's three, so that's very confusing.
It's very confusing, and like Yigal says, there's no consensus.
But the weird part is in this, they were saying, it's one God, but God has these three
Different components.
parts. But then, it doesn't make sense then to say, if it's God in their opinion, that he died for our sins, because God doesn't
That's the
so
point.
that was just not also to make any kind of comeback. I just was thinking logically, how does that?
Are you wondering about the chronology of that? How that works?
Chronology? No, I'm just it doesn't make it's the God, then it can't later die.
Yeah, so that's a good point. We'll get to that. But I think the first point that I want to say is that they had a council convened to define what is Jesus. That's when they canonized the books of the New Testament of the Christian Bible. They got rid of any reference of Jesus, or most references. A lot of references actually, fell through. but they focus primarily on the works that seem to indicate that Jesus was not just a mere mortal man. They banned, they burned,
Who's they?
this group, the council of
Oh,
Nicaea, yeah.
sorry.
So they made it this like an executive decision of what happened 300 years ago. Let's decide. Did we win the war of independence or not? What do you guys say? Let's vote in it. I'm using satire. It's like saying we should vote right now, right? Us, the people in the room, did the Americans win the War of Independence or not? Or did George Washington chop down the cherry tree? It's silly. It's silly to vote on a reality. It's silly to take a very important ideological point, and especially with regards to religion. With regards to religion, which has to be based on divinity, on prophecy, on revelation, and to have people vote on the status of that person was indeed divine. It's not rational to accept that. So that's the first point.
I don't know anything about Catholicism, but isn't there a voting system for determining when someone gets sainthood?
Yeah, what the beatification?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's I'm saying it's like voting. Think about it. We're not just voting on this on is this person a saint or do we elevate him to a saint. We're saying Jesus was God. And two people said no, he was a human, and they said okay, fine, you lost the vote. Okay, so that's number one. But I think we're going to have to go through these points independently. Why Jews reject Jesus the God, why Jews reject Jesus the Messiah, and why Jews do not accept Christianity as a whole. Okay, so I want to point out 2 points that, ironically, we know for many years Jews are the only people to be persecuted for deicide. Right? One of the reasons for anti-Semitism is that you killed our God, right? You killed Jesus, right? We know many Jews were persecuted as a result of that. So, ironically, you would think that if a God, by definition, means power, he had power. If Jesus was a God, he could have stopped us. By the fact that he didn't stop us, it must mean that he condoned it, that he agreed with it. It was a good thing. So it's ironic that we're persecuted for killing Jesus, despite the fact that they're saying that Jesus was a God, and inherent in that is that he had power, and that must be that he condoned it. And point number 2, they say he died for their sins. Had he not died for their sins, they would be left to eternal damnation. Not only shouldn't they be persecuting us, we're the ones who saved them from eternal damnation. They should be thanking us. Does that make sense? Is that? I think it's a little bit. It's hilarious. I think. Anyone says, "Oh, you killed Jesus."
I have this thing I want to say. So if we have in the times of the Sanhedrin, right, which is when all this happened, if you have somebody, there was a few things that if you didn't do in Judaism, you were condemned to death penalty, right?
Yeah, we have capital punishment.
Capital punishment, we do. So when people ask me in college, I went to a very rural Christian environment college, and people ask me, well, so you guys did kill Jesus, and it's like, and I answered yes, but if somebody else would have been doing the same thing, and his name would be Joshua, would have been killed too.
It's funny because the New Testament says that the Romans killed him.
Exactly.
So, but I think that point's irrelevant. Let's say the Jews killed him. Let's accept that as being true, right? In reality, probably the Romans killed him, or maybe the Jews killed him. Who knows?
But it would do have capital punishment. So if
and also remember, this is a God, right? And this is part of the grand scheme. why are you persecuting us? If he was a God, he could have stopped it. He didn't stop it means he condones it. And point number 2, he died for your sins. You should thank us. It's just the whole thing is silly. It's not based on. I'm pointing out from this is that we're not going up against rational thought. I'm saying rationally it doesn't make sense to persecute you Jews for deicide. A, probably because they didn't do it. B, because according to your theology, it was a good thing that they did it. But somehow we're not dealing necessarily with rational, reasonable thought that could justify their actions. Yes, Ida.
Play devil's advocate.
As always, Ida.
Why don't we praise Haman? If it were not for Haman, Jews would not have reached the status that they did in Persia. And if not for that...
Well, that's a good question, because like Pharaoh, all the bad people, Hitler, right?
Yeah,
it's all part of the divine scheme. I think the answer, what classical answer to that question. Everyone hears Yigal's question? It's a good one, philosophically. He's saying like this. We know. I think you're asking. There's 2 ways to ask the question. He's saying like this. Haman united the Jews, right? He brought the Jews back, so to speak. Like the Talmud says that Haman caused more Jews to repent and come back to God more than what? Than Jeremiah, Ezekiel, more than all the prophecies of Jeremiah. So Haman should be lauded. What an awesome guy! He brought the Jews back. I think we could extend his question philosophically to the idea of Pharaoh. Right? We know the Pharaoh and the Egyptians were punished for persecuting the Jews. Wait a minute. We know the Jews were deserving of persecution. God tells Abraham, your children will be persecuted. So it was righteous. The Jews deserved it, quote unquote. Or it was coming to them. Or it was for a purpose that they got it. So why would Pharaoh get punished if he's just, tracing within the lines of what God has planned for the Jewish people?
But it's not the same. It says in the Bible that God will harden Pharaoh's heart.
Well, that's another question. That's another question. How do you have free will? Do you lose free will? So that's Maimonides discusses that, and he says that it's possible for someone to lose free will. Separate discussion.
Yeah, but I'm just saying.
See Rambam Hilchos Tshuva Perek.
Okay.
Yeah, so it is possible. It is possible to lose free will. It's possible. Could Hitler have repented? That's the question, right? Could Hitler have done tshuva? So it's possible that once you gesund, labriut. It's possible that once you reach a certain point of wickedness, so to speak, there's no room. There's a point of no return, so to speak. But I think the answer to your question is like this: that indeed the Jews were deserving of what they got, and indeed there was a good byproduct of Haman's persecution. But we judge Haman individually, right? Pharaoh, you didn't need to be the one. You didn't need to be the vehicle, so to speak, that administered the persecution to the Jews. You chose to do that, and therefore you get punished. God made it able because the Jews were deserving of it. But you didn't have to be the aggressor. You didn't have to be the perpetrator. You didn't have to be the bad guy. So too, Haman, you indeed, the byproduct of, it's like saying, hey, thank you Hitler. Why? Without Hitler, we probably wouldn't have gotten the land of Israel. Most people agree that the UN votes of 47 and 48, right? In favor of A, the partition and B, the state of Israel. Right, those would not have happened if not for the for the sympathy that they had to the Jews of the Holocaust. So we say, oh, thank you, Hitler, you gave us the land. No, indeed, maybe, perhaps, a byproduct of the Holocaust was that we had Israel, but Hitler was wicked, and we can't thank him for we can't. He doesn't get credit for the positive byproducts of his aggression. Does that make sense, Yigal? Okay, so how come we don't accept Jesus the God? So I think Stephanie hit the nail on the head. The Jewish definition of God is that God is eternal, that God is infinite, beyond time and space, cannot have any physical or any finite qualities. What's the English word? We have an English teacher here. What's the English word for giving an infinite being finite qualities?
You tell me.
Anthropomorphism. I always get mixed up with that word and anachronism. All these isms. It's anthropomorphic to say that God has any qualities, has any not even physical, but any distinct qualities. We know this is theology 101, Jewish theology 101. The Jewish God cannot have any parts or any attributes. When it says God is angry, it doesn't mean that God is angry. This is my mind. It means He's acting in an angry way. But God can't be angry. There's no before and after with God. This is not an easy idea to swallow, but there's no before and after. He doesn't exist in time and space. Right? God right now exists as much as He exists in 1965. It's the same thing.
All of these things were created. The concept of time and space were created when the oil.
Exactly. The Jewish God, it's not possible for the Jewish God to be any different than what He is. It's not possible for the Jewish God to have any parts. It's not possible because that's the definition of God, and God cannot change. It's not possible. The Jewish God is infinite and therefore cannot change. There's a classical question by amateur theologians. Amateur theologians, raise your hand if you ever heard this question. Can God create a rock that He can't lift? Anyone heard that ever?
What?
It must be a Northeast thing.
Say it again? Is it a rock?
Oh, you heard it in this class? Okay. Can God create a stone or a rock that He can't lift? Anybody? Must be a Northeast thing. That and no soap radio. I once did the no soap radio thing in class. And I was like, what? What's no soap radio?
What is no soap radio?
Just keep rolling.
No superior.
Just keep rolling.
Right? It's just these are like it must be a Northeast thing.
I mean, you talk in Latin, right there?
No soap radio? No, I was English. No soap radio. That's it. That's all I said. So can God create a rock He can't lift? So the purpose behind the question is like a catch-22. God could do anything, right? You believe in God, you're a creationist. God could do anything, right?
There's no limitation to God.
But so can He create a stone? Of course He can create a stone, but He can't lift it. So how is that possible? It's sort of like an amateur question trying to contest the Jewish definition of God. And the answer is God cannot create a rock He cannot lift because God cannot limit Himself. God cannot change. Can God be any different than what He is? No. Can God morph into a human that has birth and grows up and dies? No. That's just it's antithetical to what God is. God cannot be limited. God cannot have any characteristics.
In fact, we are within God.
You're trying to bring in Simpson again. Every single class, Reg tries to bring in the idea of Simpson.
I didn't say it. No, I didn't say it.
Simpson is dealing with a very difficult question relating to a theological question that's thousands of years old. That if we accept the idea of an infinite or of the infinite, how is there any room for any finite? How could a finite world exist if the idea of infinite is true?
And then that answers that.
The answer is Simpson. Just like the new version of this question is determinism versus free will, right? God knows everything you're going to do. How could you have free will if God knows what you're going to choose? Dave, you've heard that question before?
Yeah.
Determinism, full determined. How do you have free will? Yeah? It's the same exact question. It's like, if God is infinite, how is there finite? How could there be anything besides for God? How could we have decision making that's not contingent, that's not dependent on God's influence? This is a very classical question, and the answer, well, at least is Simpson, is the idea of God limiting Himself, so to speak. making room for finite. So that's what Max constantly wants to bring up in
Like,
class.
for example, that God, we have a piece of God in us, but that's not necessarily a contradiction in the sense that the part of us that is that way
It's just not-
is not within time and space anyway. It's just in that
It's
sense.
um,
I mean, it is in terms of.
it's the idea of a soul that you're referencing, kind of piece of God, but it's a piece of pure spirituality,
Right.
something which is similar to God. We talked about this before. I don't know if you know, saying we talked about this. I don't know if anyone was here when I talked about it. But that's not a piece of God. It's a piece of pure spirituality. So
From a spiritual perspective, you can say that we don't believe in Jesus because he didn't accomplish what Mashiach will.
well, that's Mashiach. We're saying he can't be God according to the Jewish definition of God because the whole idea of the Trinity is just totally antithetical. We say Shema Yisrael Hashem Echad. I'm saying the basic pledge of allegiance that the Jews say every single day, and the Jews hang up onto their doorposts, and they bind in their tefillin on their head and on their arms, is the idea of one God. This whole three gods or three parts of gods, that's antithetical to Judaism. And I'll say even more: God is not man that he should be deceitful, nor a son of man that he should relent. That is a piece of scripture from the book of Numbers, the 4th book of the Torah. God is not man that he should be deceitful, nor son of man. The idea of God and man they're not the same idea. This whole morphing God and man is like Gil pointed out before the class. It's sort of a blend between Greek mythology and Jewish Jewish theology. It's just something that we haven't accepted and we don't plan on ever accepting. See now that I am he, and no God is with me. This idea of Jesus being God is, in the Jewish view, it's similar to idolatry. We know that you're not the Muslims, Islam, incidentally, they believe in the same God that we believe in. Right. The Allah is the same God as it's the same idea. They don't believe in idolatry. But Christianity technically is categorized by Jews as being idol worship. That's why the laws of a church and the halacha of a church, of walking into a church, will be different than walking into a mosque, for example. You may be able to pray in a mosque because it's still a house of God, our God. It's not idolatry.
In different churches?
Well, I'm saying this is what Rabbi Maimonides wrote this. He made the distinction already, 800 years ago.
Because of all the
No, it's
images
just
and
what
images and things like that inside a.
Well, yeah. Well, it's a house of worship of idolatry. No different than idolatry of the Greek idolatry.
Well, like we said before, not all Christians believe in.
The divinity of Jesus.
I think so.
No, they don't
That's
believe in
the whole
it.
point of being a
Jehovah's
Christian
Witnesses.
is that, like, that's what's so different about Christianity from Judaism is that to be a Christian, you have to accept Christ as your Lord and Savior.
Lord and Savior.
Yeah.
The only one that does different things, Jehovah's Witnesses, are the only ones that don't believe he's a god. Everybody else does.
I worked with a Mormon over the summer.
Well, they got one other book they had on top of it there, and a lot of Christians say the Mormons aren't Christians.
Yeah.
So that's a whole other issue. Mormons are not.
It's an
Back to your ally.
Okay. So the first point is that we view Christianity, or the idea of man as being a god, is no different than a son being the god, or the 30,000 gods that the Romans have or had, as chronicled by the Roman historian Dio Cassius. It's no different. What's the difference? Man god, Pharaoh thought he was a god. Why is Jesus being considered a god any different? It's idolatry. We haven't accepted it. We don't plan on accepting it. But I think this point so that's point number one. But point number two, I think, is the most important point, which is, this is an idea that a bunch of Christian leaders in the 4th century espoused to be true. But how do we know it's true? Unpopular question learned. what evidence do they have? What evidence do they have that it is indeed so? It's a pretty grandiose claim, as every religion is. It's a pretty grand claim to say that a man is a god. And just if I were to, we would just ask the question: what kind of evidence? How do we know that's true? It's a very simple question. How do we know it's true? And that's the same question we can ask the Mormons. How do we know that Joseph Smith is telling the truth? How do we know he met the angel? How do we know he saw the golden tablets? How do we know that this Book of Mormon is a translation of the ancient Egyptian, or what's what he called it, I think, ancient Egyptian? Reformed Egyptian, I'm sorry. Reformed Egyptian, a non-existent language that no one ever heard of, and no one's seen these tablets. How do we know you're telling the truth? How do we know? How do we know?
So how do we know that the angel is true then?
Okay, if you ever say, because it's in the Torah, we know the
No,
Torah.
it's also, these people will say it's in the book too.
That's a good question. Judaism is different than every other religion by the fact that our revelation, or the reason, the basis on which we believe our religion is different, or was a mass revelation. If you ask a Muslim, why do you believe in Islam? He'll tell you because Muhammad Rasul Allah. Muhammad is the last prophet of Allah, right? And he told us that this is the book of instructions that God gave me, right? So 117 surahs of 117 chapters of the Quran are the books of instructions of God. How do we know that this has come from God? Because Muhammad told us. How do we know that Muhammad is indeed a prophet and not a charlatan? So that's the next question. So if before they slash you to death, before they commit jihad on you, they'll tell you that we don't know. We just believe that he's the prophet because he told us, or he convinced us, or we don't. It's his word versus my word. I'll claim he's not a prophet. He said, she said. How do we know it's true? How do we know that Muhammad is a prophet? We don't know. He was glib. He had dreams and he claims he had prophecy. It's his claim versus everyone else's claim, right? We claim he's not. I say he's not a prophet. How do we know that he's right and I'm wrong? How do we know that Paul had this tremendous revelation on the way to Damascus, and he met Jesus, and Jesus convinced him to stop assembling against me? Why do you assail against me? You should start supporting me. How do we know that's true? Well, it's his word versus our word. How do we know that Joseph Smith indeed found those golden tablets and translated them from their original Reformed Egyptian into the Book of Mormon when no one's seen the tablets, no one met the angel? How do we know he's telling the truth? It's his word versus our word. How do we know that Moses was a prophet? How do we know? Because we had the collective prophecy, and we all experienced by ourselves God calling out Moses, come to the mountain. We know that everything Moses says is the word of a prophet, because we know that. It was experienced by everyone. 603,500 males between the ages of 20 and 60. You could surmise that there would be the same amount of females. And if you take that number and say, well, 600,000 males between the age of 20 and 60, plus 600,000 females between the age of 20 and 60, you would assume that if the same ratio would exist, you would have 400,000 males and females between the age of 0 and 20. Right? So you have at least 1.6 million people that all experienced with their own eyes and ears the prophecy of God calling out Moses. It's a mistake. We all watched 1956, the Ten Commandments. The movie is incorrect. If you read the Torah, if you open up the Bible, it doesn't say that it was just Moses had the prophecy. Everyone heard it. Everyone experienced prophecy. The reason why we know that Moses is a prophet is not because he convinced us of that. It's because we were there. Our ancestors were there. They saw, they experienced. They saw with their own eyes, they heard with their own ears.
So the sound was seen and the light was sound.
Well, yeah, it was. I'm saying it was prophecy. It was some sort of yes.
So the performance of miracles alone is not sufficient.
Absolutely, and it even says so in the Torah. It says that you'll have someone who comes and does wonders. We had Elisha. Elisha's pouring oil and keeps on pouring oil from one jug, right? Let's say the Baba Sali did the same thing also up to 1984. But imagine if I took this this cup of oil, and I keep on pouring it, and it keeps on pouring. So either a magician, or I'm a prophet, or I have a grasp over nature. I'm able to do amazing things. It doesn't make me God. Elisha, no one claimed Elisha was God. Elisha kept on pouring the oil, kept on filling more and more and more jars. Elisha resuscitated the dead man. Elijah brought down the fire from the heaven. We have stories of miracles throughout, right? And maybe Jesus did do miracles. So what? He did walk on water. Let's accept it, okay? We can say, oh, it never happened. Who knows? He did walk on water, okay? So what? That doesn't prove anything. And it even says so in the Torah. He said, the Torah says clearly, right? Deuteronomy, it says, I think somewhere in the 30s, you can find it if you're interested. You'll have someone who comes and does wonders. These unbelievable things. Shalom ro'enechem, your eyes haven't seen, right? Walks on water, does whatever. And then he'll tell you to abrogate the Torah. He'll tell you to erase one word of the Torah. He's a false prophet. You put him to death. It doesn't matter that you could do that. It doesn't matter. I don't know. How did he do it? If he did it. Maybe he was a magician. Maybe he knew black magic. I don't know how he did it. But that does not mean anything. Let's say he did do it. So what? And like I said, there's other examples of miracles, but no one ever claims that Elisha or Elijah were gods. Stephanie.
I have like two things. Well, one is related to this, but it's like if the Christians believe in the Old Testament, and then how does it, meaning like if they believe that, then how do they
Well, that's an excellent point.
kind of bring together the like God
What's-
did it right in the
what-
beginning.
what
so
Stephanie-
how do you contradict God's own word that was
Exactly.
in the Old Testament?
How do they reconcile?
Well, meaning it's God's word they're saying. So, and not to be like God did it right the first time, but like how do you say? Oh,
Means
God
what they're
did
claiming,
that?
it's replacement theology. They're saying, well, indeed, the Torah was true, but the Jews didn't do a good enough job, and they lost it. And now it came to us. And come along the Muslims 600 years later, they say, oh, you guys were right. Jesus was a prophet. Moses was a prophet. Ibrahim was a prophet. But now Muhammad, right? Very convenient. Means,
So
but they're
everything else
accepting that at one point in time, the Torah was true. Now, what Stephanie's pointing out, that we have 3 times in Deuteronomy 4, Deuteronomy 11, Deuteronomy 13, it says clearly, this is the final word of God. Lo tosif v'lo tigra. Don't add, don't subtract. If you have someone who comes and wants to abrogate the Torah, wants to get rid of even one mitzvah from the Torah and say this is not true anymore, you want to have one Paul coming in and saying, from now on, ladies and gentlemen, the Torah is not true. You don't need to keep Shabbos. You don't need to do a bris milah. You don't need to do a circumcision. You don't need to wear tefillin. You don't need to wear tzitzit. Nothing. Just love thy neighbor as thyself. All you need to do. He abrogated the law.
There's a rabbi that tried to justify that the word "et" in the Torah was unnecessary. He spent 80 some years doing this, and when he came to one that he couldn't unjustify, he threw away all his work. I heard this story before.
And what's the point with that? You're saying that every word is...
No, every "et."
Yeah, even the word "et," the Hebrew word "et," which is not really... it's a very small word, but every word is necessary.
Right.
So what were like at the time of?
But I think your point, one of the points that I wanted to bring up, but I forgot. So Stephanie's point, she hit the nail on the head. If they accept the Torah was once true, it has to always be true.
But I mean, it's part of their. I mean.
Yes,
Old
means-
Testament, New Testament,
yes.
so-
But there's not the same value for a lot of Christians, you know.
The New Testament
your
is
start,
more-
Your start point is Jesus is your Lord and Savior. The New Testament is your start point. Then you use the Old Testament, you go back to time.
Did I drink from it?
What you believe.
I saw Mike. I didn't drink any water. Keep it there. I might start drinking.
Well, there's plus that once I'll tell you.
But Jill, if I
that-
catch what
that's-
you
that's
have,
your
it's not so
first
bad.
point. And the other thing is, if you look at a lot of the mission stuff, there's a lot of cherry picking. So there's certain things they'll do, certain things they won't do, ignoring like translational issues, which is a whole other thing. But your start point is Jesus is correct, and then you're going back and you're basically doing a back search, and then your eyes are looking at it. You have not accepted this first thing first. You've accepted first the gospel, then you go back, and then you go back to those eyes where this is what you're looking at. So if you talk to Christians on this conversation, they'll find Jesus and things are just like, where do you even get that from?
I'm just
So you want to do like live streaming?
At the
Can
time
you do like
that
live
you're-
streaming?
I mean, I guess that makes sense.
So
The time that you
Yes,
were
you could
talking
just do
about
Skype.
that whatever whenever this was supposed to happen, all those people that became Christians, what were they? Like,
Well, originally, Christianity started off as a subsect of Judaism. No different than the Sadducees, the Essenes, all these, the Dead Sea sect, the guys who came up with the Dead Sea Scrolls, the most significant archaeological discovery of the past 100 years. There were lots of different groups that spun off, so to speak, from Judaism, from mainstream, normative Judaism. The Christians started off as also a subsect of Judaism. And for many years, they were Jews. They were practicing Jews. They kept Shabbos and they wore tefillin and they were Jews like everyone else. Everything. And comes along Paul years later and does an about face. He started off as being someone who was opposing the new Judeo-Christians, and overnight he became their leader, so to speak. And he said, okay, fine. From now on, you don't need to keep Shabbos. You don't need to wear tefillin. You don't need to have a circumcision to become Christian. So he abrogated the law. He erased the law. He abolished the law. Abrogated is the word for it. So it started off as being like a subsect, and it eventually became its own religion. You go.
I actually had this question last week, and I'm glad you brought it up.
Okay.
So you said that it is illogical to believe that God created and gave us the Torah, and then he changed his mind and started with a different plan with the New Testament.
Well, it's not illogical. It's not possible, because the Torah says clearly that that this is the last word.
Hence,
you can't add, can't subtract. If you have a prophet comes and changes
so
one word,
because of the
he's a false
literal
prophet.
construction of the Torah, because I had the question of
How many times does it say in the Torah, Lador Vador, right?
for generations.
For generation, right? You should wear your tefillin, Lador Roseichem, your tzitzits, right? Your tzitzit, the fringes, Lador Roseichem, for your generations. How many times in the Torah it says bris milah, right? Circumcision. You should have circumcised for your generations.
my question.
The Torah,
Precedes Torah.
there's hundreds of times a reference to the Torah for the eternality of the Torah. Yes, but
My question preceded the Torah in that he created, for example, Adam and Eve. And
Okay.
that didn't work out, and the plan changed. And then he created the first Dor Mabul. And that didn't work out. Then there was the flood, and he created.
But
There
it
was
wasn't
another
that it didn't work
generation.
out necessarily. I mean, it was that led to other things.
It led to a nation, I guess.
interestingly, in the Midrash it says that Adam was bound to fail, right at the beginning of the Torah, right? At the beginning of the Torah, Adam was bound to fail. But your question is a good question, but it's dissimilar. Adam was dissimilar to the Torah, to the Jews, because this was the last. I'm saying it says clearly. It's this, huh?
That's entrapment.
Yes, and ironically, we have the Midrash. Be well, Dave. Thanks for coming. We have the Midrash that says that by Mount Sinai, okay, this is a Midrash, okay, God turned over the mountain on top of the Jews like a barrel. Kafa aleim har kedidis. He turned the mountain on top of the Jews like a barrel and says, if you accept the Torah, good, and if not, sham take for us, I'm going to bury you right there, alive. So yes, you're pretty much stuck. And like I've said this before, but a Jew can be baptized 100 times. He or she may get wet, but they'll still be Jewish. So yes, entrapment. It's a good word. There's no way to undo your Judaism. And ironically, this is a totally separate point, but the Jews who tried to run away from their Judaism, they met a guy named Hitler who said, wait a minute, you're not Jewish, right? Give me the records. Let's go back years and years and years and years. The Jews who tried to run away from their religion, the Gentiles made them Jewish again.
So it's clear that God didn't have a plan that Adam and Eve couldn't fulfill, and that God had to change the plan.
You want to know
And so it's clear that was not the case.
that what?
That God had a plan for creation.
Yes, had Adam succeeded, the world as we know it would not be. And we're sort of here to pick up the parts. But what I'll tell you, and I'll send you to 997a, we're either going to succeed, or the world's either going to come to its completion, either as a result of what we do, or despite of what we do. Mashiach, or the Jewish Mashiach, can come in the most righteous generation, B'darsha Kulei Zakai, or in the most wicked generation, B'darsha Kulei Chayiv. Doesn't matter. It's either going to come as a result of what we do or despite of what we do. And Stephanie and Shirley heard me go on about. Oh, did you? I don't remember if you did. If you were by that discussion, I don't remember when I talked about how it could, you could either grow as a result of your actions or despite your actions.
Yeah.
Was that? So yes, we're here. We're trapped. We're stuck. You're Jewish. You go. There's nothing to do about it. And you are entrusted with the responsibility of mankind. You can't run away from it. Yes. So, but I think this point is a very important point. Our religion is different at its founding than every other religion known to man. In that we had a revelation that was experienced by the masses, and every other religion that began with a revelation was experienced by the few. One, maybe two.
Except that one that 3 million people.
Except for Hinduism, that 3 billion people experienced it, but they all died, and one guy remembered. So once again, it's one guy, right?
How do you know that?
Huh?
How do you know that?
How do I know that? This is my job. What do you think?
Didn't I say it?
Wikipedia.
Yeah, Wikipedia. Yes. So that's this is an important point.
I'll make your announcement.
This is a crucial point. Whenever someone makes a claim, a grandiose claim, you have to know, how do we know this person's telling the truth? How do we know this person's not lying? How do we know this person's not a charlatan? And if it's just our word versus their word, it's very hard to justify accepting that. If there are a bunch of people that claim that Jesus is God, we have to ask the question: how do we know that you're right? What evidence do we have? And we have no evidence. So yes, that's a very important point. If that's the only point that everyone walks out with tonight knowing, I'll be very happy. Our religion is different than their religions. We have a national revelation. We have a revelation experienced by at least 1 million people, 603,500 adult males. We could safely assume there were at least 1 million plus total. We all experienced Moses as a prophet. We experienced natural prophecy. We experienced the first 2 of the 10 Commandments from God Himself. The rest of them were through Moses. But from now on, everything that Moses tells us is the words of a prophet. And I want to tell you guys another important point that most people don't know. I'll say it quietly, so I'll get your attention. Maimonides, in the 13 Principles of Faith, says something very strange. He says that Moses is different than every other prophet. I think this is the question that's really dancing around Yigal's mind.
But it's in the Bible.
Listen, Max. How do we know? Someone could ask me. The Torah says that Abraham was a prophet as well. How do we know it's true? He's like Muhammad. That's a good question. How do you know that Abraham is a true prophet? It's just his word versus our word. How do you know that Isaac or that Jacob or all these people, how do you know that they were prophets? It's no different than Muhammad. And the answer is yes, indeed. Abraham, on his own merit, if Abraham were to claim that he was a prophet, we would say, how do we know it's true? But the Torah, as delivered to us by Moses, who was a prophet for sure, he told us that Abraham was a prophet. That's why Moses is called Avi HaNavim, the father of all prophets. Because all prophets, how do we know that Abraham is a prophet, a true prophet? Only because Moses told us that he was.
And prophets after Moshe's lifetime?
Well, Moshe established also the criteria of how we know what a prophet is and what a prophet isn't. That's where the idea of the criteria of prophecy is clearly established. That's what.
How do they explain that in terms of now? They don't think he's a prophet. They think he's one of a prophet.
Oh, well, they claim he. Well, it's really Paul. Paul's the founder of Christianity. Paul claims that Jesus came to him, so Paul's the prophet. How do we know it's true? It's the same question.
So you mean that the way to establish prophecy is not valid?
Well, there's the list criteria. For example, if I were to come right now to the square here, to Bel Air Boulevard, where all the Jews are, right? And I would say, I'm a prophet. what would they do? They'd kill me on the spot.
Try it tonight.
I'm not going to try it. Tonight, maybe I'll get away with it.
I'm gonna be drunk anyway.
But if you have someone who's not renowned for their piety, a scholar of the highest regard, and that person claims that they're a prophet, they're killed on the spot. This is a false prophet. Because everyone else believes that prophecy is like winning the lottery ticket. It's like, oh, boom, you got prophecy. Why did you get prophecy? Just no one knows. It's like winning a lottery ticket. In Judaism, it's another stage of your growth. So, like Masiel Sasharim, the guy the path of the just, gives the outline of how to achieve prophecy. You could get there. It's another stage of your growth. But if you're not holding at least one stage before prophecy, if you're just a regular Joe, you cannot possibly have prophecy. Prophecy is not just doled out by luck of the draw. So yeah, they're very specific criteria.
So how do the Christians explain that?
I don't know how to explain anything. I don't know. Faith.
How do they?
I don't know how to justify anything. How do we know it's true? Well, what do you mean? It's
I have a
faith.
weird question, but for rabbis.
And if you don't accept it, eternal damnation.
Well, I'm just wondering, as Jews, we don't believe you have to be Jewish to be a godly, to be a godly person.
To be a good person, yes.
But we do, when we think, we're supposed to be a light unto nations, but what is our approach to, if we really believe that Christianity is idolatry, how come, what is our approach in terms of dealing with that, and how come, for example, more rabbis and, I don't know, if it's possible that some of the Christians used to be way down the line Jewish, how come there's not more dialogue? Is that just not morally well?
So, I think that you brought up another important point, because we which is another distinction that we have between us and other monotheistic, quote-unquote monotheistic religions, that we're very pluralistic. There's lots of different avenues. Like we say, Chasidi Umas Salam Yesh Lam Chelek Lam Haba. The righteous of the members of the world of the members of the nations have a share in the world to come. Which means you don't have to be Jewish to be good. You don't have to be Jewish to be righteous. You don't have to be Jewish to get reward.
Right, but I'm saying because if Christianity.
So yeah, if you see a Christian who really wants to know the truth, in all likelihood, is your duty to explain to them that Jesus is not God, and you should. It means the idea of teaching the 7 Noahide laws to the Gentiles is. I have a friend who used to have class. He was a rabbi. He would teach only Gentiles. I'm saying he would teach Gentiles and teach them the seven Noahide laws, the 7 mitzvot that are universals, the 7 universals.
Well, I'm asking him more specifically because, okay, here's the thing. If we do believe in a pluralistic sense, and we believe, you could be a good, but if the basis of Christianity is that you must believe in Jesus to be saved,
yes,
and that potentially they're reaching out to anybody to be saved and become an idolater in that specific way.
So we have to stop them.
Isn't there, meaning it's not, I don't
Remember, you cannot argue, you cannot have a rational discussion with someone who's basing everything on faith. Just like the Islam is exactly the same thing. We know Islam is also not very not very not rational, but also does not have any tolerance for non-Muslims. One of the basic ideologies of Islam is that there's Dar al-Islam, because I can say it. No one here knows no one knows Arabic. There's Dar al-Islam and there's Dar al-Harb. Anyone heard that before? There is the nation of Islam. And there's the nation of the sword, Chad, like Kharif, the Hebrew Kharif, the sword, which means you're either with us or we're slaughtering you. Right? If you're not a Muslim, you're second-class citizens. You're maybe a Dehimi. Dehimi is the Christians and the Jews are like second-class citizens, but everyone else is just slaughtered. Even the Jews and Christians are slaughtered. But similarly, you cannot argue. You can't say if you just make a cartoon, about Muhammad, that's it. You're toast. So you're trying to have dialogue with them. You can't have a rational conversation with someone who's not willing to be rational. But there were, historically, we have many instances of Jews and Christians having dialogue, having debate, engaging in polemics. And the problem with it is, now it's probably better, but the problem is, historically, you lived in a very Christian world. Not like Christian today, but where the church ran the government, and they were very radical. So, if you disprove them, they'll just kill you. So, what do you gain? I think today there is room for dialogue. There is room for dialogue and debate. The problem with debate is I know we're getting off on a tangent and we're going overtime here, but the problem with debate is that you can debate them and they'll debate you, and the uninitiated or the average person in the crowd will say, well, he's making sense or she's making sense, and the other person's also making sense. So you can't, for someone who's ignorant, someone who's not well versed, they can throw out scripture, you'll throw out scripture, and like the uninitiated will think, well, they're pretty smart, they have it figured out, they're pretty smart, they're figured out, and you don't gain anything. So I do think it's encouraged. I think especially if you have someone who's genuinely interested in finding the truth, like truth seekers, the one in a million who's really concerned about what the truth is, then there's room for debate and discussion. Otherwise, what do you really gain? But I really don't want to go overtime. You know how much I hate going overtime. So I'm going to quickly outline. So now we know why we don't accept Jesus as being God. Why do we not accept Jesus as being the Messiah? Well, Jesus didn't fulfill any of the criteria of being the Messiah. So why should we believe that he's Messiah? He didn't build the third temple. Did he? Oh, not that we know of, right? He didn't gather the Jews back to the land of Israel. He didn't usher in an era of world peace, like as it says in Isaiah, nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall man learn war anymore. Right? None of this happened. The universal knowledge of the God of Israel, which is also in Zechariah, right? That everyone will proclaim that God will be king of the world, and everyone will know that the Jews are the chosen people. Right? He didn't bring the Jews back to the land of Israel. None of the prophecies, none of the criteria of being the Mashiach were fulfilled by Jesus. Why should we believe? Why should we believe that he was indeed the Messiah? So the Christians may counter and say, "Well, yes, he didn't do it, but he's coming back, second coming. He may have not fulfilled it at present. He may have not fulfilled it, but in the future he will." So the argument with that is, okay, fine. Well, okay, so let him come back, and we'll wait for him then. And there's no sources at all for the second coming. I think that the radical in the Chabad Lubavitch Hasidim, right? So they have that radical group that thinks the Rebbe is Mashiach, right? Mainstream Chabad obviously doesn't accept that, but you have the fringe movement. So I've spoken to a few of them, and they're out of their minds, in my opinion. They say, well, the Rebbe was Mashiach, but he didn't die, or he did die, he's still alive. I'm saying I think that's no different. Is he alive or is he dead? Is he dead? Well, he was buried, right? So this is a tremendous turmoil in the Chabad Lubavitch Hasidus right now, because the mainstream, they obviously don't believe that, but you have that fringe group, which, in my opinion, it's no different than what the second coming claim. Either he's not dead, he's still alive, he'll come back. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate. But yes, so the idea of Jesus having a second coming is not found in any sources, and it's just a description of the failure of him fulfilling any of the prophecy. He didn't fulfill the prophecies. I'll very conveniently come up with the idea that he's coming back. He's not a descendant of David, and we pointed this out before the class. If you look at Matthew chapter 1, you look at Luke chapter 3, they have different genealogies of who Jesus was, or how Jesus came from the house of David. We know the Mashiach will come from the house of David, the Davidic line. Some people claim he didn't have a father. That also makes another problem. If he didn't have a father, how did he come from David? Tremendous question. No one has an answer to that one. But let's say he did come as the book of Matthew and the book of Mark both peg Joseph as being his father, but they have 15 generation gap or discrepancy between Matthew and Luke, and they have a totally different genealogy for Jesus. So these are the two works of Christianity, two gospels accepted by all the Christians, but having different genealogies of Jesus. So yes, I don't know how to. There's no way to answer that. And lastly, if the Mashiach is supposed to, as it says in the Torah, in Deuteronomy, that he's going to bring the Jews back to observing the Torah, and specifically, they abrogated the Torah, and Jesus, as it says in And John clearly says that he himself violated the Shabbos once. So for all those reasons, we don't accept Jesus as being a God. We don't accept Jesus as being a Messiah. Rationally, like we said, there's no way to accept it. I think Stephanie's point is a very strong point, that if they accept the Torah as being true, if it was true, it always is true, by evidence of its own words. Their definition of God contradicts the Torah's definition of God, and their definition of God is something which is, Jesus as a God is something that they agreed upon by a council. Silly. And lastly, is a silly question, but how do we know it's true? What evidence do we have? We like to base things on evidence. Lastly, he's not the Messiah because he did not fulfill any of the Messianic prophecies. Not even one. So why should we believe him? So maybe there's a second coming. Okay, but that's just a description of the failure of him fulfilling the categories. So when we celebrate the holiday, Xmas, Christmas, which, by the way, even according to Christian sources, is not his birthday, which is the Christian sources. If you look, the birthday is either the March 28th. Clement Bishop, the Bishop of Alexandria claimed it was November 18th. Most present-day Christian scholars put the date on September 11th. Yes, interesting. But no serious theologians, Christian theologians, put December 25th as Jesus' birthday. So, yes, it is weird, yes. Yeah, it was the end of the Saturnalia, which is a pagan holiday.
What is, I just want to put up, I mean, not that I don't think, in this situation, but there are certain verses that Christians do mention. Like,
yes, the misinterpretation. They misinterpret verses. Like the word Alma. They take the word Alma. Well, they have Isaiah 3, but it's all misinterpretations. It's all... I have a few examples here. They claim that the verse in Isaiah 53 refers to Jesus, the suffering servant. It's actually baloney. Ke'ari, they take the word Ke'ari, and they Ke'ari means like a lion, but they misinterpret it to be like he was a reference to the crucifixion. They pierced his hands and feet. It's and also doesn't prove anything because that the Romans, the preferred method of torture, of killing, was crucifixion. So even if it were to be true that the Messiah was crucified, who says that Jesus? Well, there were thousands of Jews that were crucified. It doesn't mean anything. The virgin birth also, they mistranslated the word in Isaiah. Remember, even the historical accounts of early Christianity. Josephus clearly writes. You can say Josephus was partial to the Jews. Was he not? But he clearly says that only the ignorant and the uninitiated classes of Jews accepted Jesus. Only. The more sophisticated Jews have never accepted Jesus, and I think even to present day, where there's a major pushes to missionize Jews, but it's generally the only people they get, which is very unfortunate, the only people they get are the people who don't know any better, who don't have any understanding of Judaism, who don't have any fluency or even basic knowledge of the Tanakh, who don't have strong roots in Judaism anyhow, and those are the ones that they prey upon. But the theology, their philosophy has never held a candle towards to ours. So we don't have anything to worry about. But Stephanie, you want to argue with them? Good luck. But it's an exercise in futility. It's weird. When
I was in college, one guy stood up and was giving a Torah, after the study, right? And his wife was sitting next to me, and he got up and started talking, and then all of a sudden he went off and started talking about Jesus, and one day we'll learn. And I said, oh my God, this poor woman, her husband's having a nervous breakdown, like in front of everybody. Anyway, at the end he was like, this is what people are doing on campus, and it's very, like, I thought he was totally for real. Like, I didn't know he was, like, making a point. But I'm just curious, like, how many people, like, you're saying, like, it's a big thing for them to missionalize, but how many people are, like, affected by it, too? Is there, like, you know, how many?
It's silly because they're a religion. Okay, I'm about to go off here. They're a religion that's based upon one idea. Right? They're the religion of tolerance and love, right? That's the one thing that they salvaged from the Torah was the idea of love thy neighbor, right? That's the one thing that they kept from the Torah, and that's the one thing that they epitomize the antithesis of, right? They slaughtered what the Crusades. They slaughtered everyone, the Muslims, the Christians, doesn't matter. There's like hundreds of cities. That over the past 1,000 years that the Christians came in and just slaughtered whole Jewish towns. How many different Christian countries? The Inquisition, right? They said if you either convert or we kill you, or we kill you. They burned people alive. There's thousands, or probably millions.
The Thanksgiving. What do you?
And we'll just saying that they don't accept another person that be a godly person, like even in that sense, like. I mean, I have a good friend, she's that very rare Christian. She's like, Stephanie, I don't believe Jews should accept Jesus. I get very offended when my minister says that. Do you think I'm a bad Christian? I said, no, I think you're a great Christian. But she's like, but for our mutual friend, like, she says that she's like, oh my God, all those people that died on September 11th, I hope they accepted Jesus at the last second so they don't burn in hell, kind of thing. And that seems so
Tell her not to worry about it. Don't worry about it.
So I'm saying that seems so intolerant. Just that idea that like you can't be an amazing person that's living a godly life, like that. Even despite all the murder and other stuff.
That is our point is if you know Jesus and it's faith alone, not good works, which is different between Catholicism and your Protestant, which is what you're dealing with. That's a start point. I want to it's faith alone. If you faith alone, your use of Jesus is your faith alone. You'll accept it. So that is your bottom line. You start there, and then everything else is interpreted with those eyes.